interpreted the world around them and translated everyday scenes into a variety of art forms. China was the Greece and Rome of the Far East. Through 50 centuries, her civilization and culture were passed on to surrounding lands. Small wonder that traditional architecture, art and dress have a basic uniformity throughout the whole of the Far East. Even in Japan, most westernized of Oriental countries, there is so much that still reminds us of China. And this is true of Korea, Formosa, Vietnam, Thailand. Throughout the lands of the East, we find another unifying factor. Wherever we go in the central or southern parts of the region, across the mountain ranges or the plains, we find most of the land that can be cultivated patterned with paddy fields. For rice is the staple food of the East. Farming methods have changed little. Still, the patient ox pulls the simple wooden plough. Where climate and land permit, more than one crop is sown each year. This farmer is sowing barley, the second crop in many temperate parts of the region. The chamber pots sold in the market are very important. The contents, politely known as night soil, are sold and carefully placed in barrels like these, also on sale in the market. Each morning the barrels are transported to the fields, for the crops in the East are fertilized with human, not animal manure. The towns contribute their quota of night soil for the fields too. The practice of fertilizing the crops with human manure is a very unhygienic one. Food is contaminated with human diseases that can be transmitted to other humans much more easily than is the case when animal manure is used. The rice is harvested by hand, a long and back-breaking task. Next comes the threshing, separating the seeds from the stalks. Often it's still done by hand, using a flail, a surprisingly difficult implement to use. Mechanical threshing machines are appearing in the larger villages, many of them foot-operated. Some are power-driven by a small petrol motor. The rice still has to be winnowed. That is, chaff and small stalks have to be removed. The wind carries them away. Winnowing is often done in the road. Space is scarce in eastern villages. Of course, rice isn't the only crop to be harvested. Beans form a useful addition to the diet, and the smaller varieties are threshed to separate the beans from the pods. Chillies are a favorite spice. Some crops are little known elsewhere. The persimmon is a favorite fruit in the East. The A-frame enables astonishingly heavy loads to be carried. At harvest time, transport becomes the great problem. The owner of a Bullock cart is fortunate indeed. The bicycle is now the universal carrier and transports much more than just its rider, even pigs to market. A good dose of rice wine is usually given to the pig before the journey begins. In the temperate region, autumn is the favorite season, when the earth has yielded food in plenty and the weather is mild and pleasant. In the country, there's lots to do. The rice stalks are stacked in the middle of the courtyard, ready to be used on the roof. The roof is always re-thatched before the winter comes. rice to be pounded, newly picked cotton to be sorted, and vegetables to be prepared. And all around, the fruit and vegetables ripen and dry in the warm sun. Most eastern houses are built around a courtyard. In country houses, the animals live here, where they're safe and can most easily be fed. Rice forms the basis of almost every meal. Food is eaten with chopsticks. You have a bowl of rice of your own. You help yourself to morsels from other dishes, such as meat, fish, and vegetables. A cheaper food than rice is noodles, made from wheat flour, and rather like spaghetti. It's eaten as the main dish instead of rice. A great variety of additional dishes are often provided, depending upon the season and how well off the people are. Men and women eat separately. Usually the men eat first, waited on by the women, who eat later in another room. When the meal is over, the table is removed and the family sit on cushions on the floor. Shoes are never worn indoors. In so many ways, they do the opposite from us. Playing the Eastern form of drafts, they don't place the pieces on the squares as we do. They place them on the intersections of the lines. When it's time to go to bed, the cushions are removed and the mattresses and quilts set out in their place. For pillows, a wooden headrest or a bag of beans. Few homes have running water. Every drop of water must be fetched from the village well. Washing is usually done out of doors, beside a river or stream. This is how clothes are ironed in the East. Villages are usually closely packed and overcrowded. One of the most widespread religions of the East is Buddhism, and a Buddhist shrine is to be found in many villages. This typical Chinese village is on the coast beside the South China Sea. Villages close to the sea or a river, as well as cities, tend to overflow onto the water. Living in small boats is a common practice throughout the Orient. Each of these small boats, or sampans as they're called, is the home of a whole family, and in some cases their place of work as well. Some of them become floating restaurants during the evening. Whether it's a floating village or a village on dry land, conditions are very cramped. This is the main street. Piped water is quite a luxury. In the towns, the houses are packed together just as closely as in the villages. Cooking is usually done with wood or charcoal. In the cooler parts in the north, an ingenious way of heating houses in winter has been evolved. The heat from the fire passes through channels under the houses and heats the floor. Since everybody sits and sleeps on the floor, it's very effective. Houses are often surrounded by a high wall. In many Eastern countries, the birth rate is high, and the number of children requiring schooling is very great. These Chinese children have the unenviable task of learning 3,000 or more characters before they can read or write their language even moderately well. Japanese schoolboys have only to learn about 880. The Japanese use some Chinese characters and some invented in Japan in the 8th and 9th centuries. But for such things as personal names, Chinese characters only are used, as on this Japanese visiting card. These Korean school children have to learn only 24 characters. Korea has introduced a simplified alphabet that makes reading and writing Korean much simpler. School children in Korea wear school uniforms exactly like those worn by Japanese children because for many years Japan ruled Korea. Still today, there are many relics of those years of strong Japanese influence. All Oriental children have to learn how to use the abacus. The teacher has a large one below the blackboard and he sets the class a sum. An abacus is a frame supporting beads threaded on wires. With its aid, it's possible to do complicated sums without writing anything down. It's often described as the calculating machine of the East. She's multiplying 693 by 48. There's the answer. Classical dancing is often taught. These girls are wearing the traditional dress of Korea. Some old men in Korea still wear the dignified horsehair hat and white clothes that show that they've reached the age of 61 and need work no more. Women's dresses in Korea are full and high-waisted. Traditional dress varies in different regions of the East, although it's always got a strong resemblance to the classical style of China. In Japan, the kimono is another version of the traditional style, this time with a distinctive Japanese flavor. A coat for two, another Japanese variation. In the cities, dress is becoming increasingly westernized. In the past, men wore Oriental dress just as distinctive as that worn by women. But for some reason, men everywhere make the change to Western dress before the women. Probably because it's more practical for working in. Many of the great cities of the Orient have become westernized in much more than dress. Perhaps it's not surprising that Hong Kong should have a very Western appearance in view of its many links with the West. But maybe it is surprising to find that Tokyo looks just as Western. At night, the fashionable shopping centre of the Ginza might well be London or New York. And yet even in the most westernized of the greater cities, there's plenty that's Oriental if you look for it. This tea house in Tokyo, for instance. Or the Palace of the Emperor. On the national holidays and religious festivals, millions of these apparently westernized people flock to the ancient temples and shrines of Buddhism, Shintoism, and other religions. Buildings in the classical style of ancient China. There they perform ceremonies and religious rites. Thousands of years of village culture is not cast off in a few decades. At heart, all the peoples of the Orient are linked by their common cultural heritage. A rural heritage. A heritage that owes its origin to life among the hills and plains of China.